Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Chuck Tirone, Reading's Conservation Administrator, pursuant to state legislation superseding certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, relating to the COVID-19 emergency, the May 10th, 2023 public meeting of the Reading Conservation Commission shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. The meeting shall instead be held virtually using Zoom. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. All materials for this meeting are available at the following link, which I'll provide in the chat. Martha Moore, the Conservation Commission Chair, will facilitate this meeting. Please note there will be a public comment period for each hearing. Each vote taken during this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. We will begin with a roll call attendance. Martha, can you please conduct a roll call and to confirm that all members are present and that they can hear, and then review tonight's agenda?
Okay. Bill,
Present.
and just say your name and say member.
Oh, I apologize. Bill McCann's present.
John. Oh dear, we can't hear you, John.
No.
All right, but we know John is here. We'll have him work on the sound. Andrew,
Andrew Driven, present.
Brian,
Brian Bowe, Vice Chair, present.
and this is Martha Moore, Chair, present, and we have Walter.
Walt Talbot, present.
Okay, and Walter is an associate member. And we have another associate member here showing up as interpreter, and that's Tony. Oh, I forget your last name, Tony, but he's also an associate member. Okay, Tony Rodolakis. And Tony, are you able to speak and hear? Chuck, have you unmuted Tony? Or allowed Tony to unmute? Yeah, Tony, you're a co-host. Try and see if you can unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'm on a different computer tonight, so I don't have the video set up correctly, and my name is not appearing as my own. I'll try and figure out how to change that, but I am here.
Okay, and John.
Yes.
Everyone can be heard.
Perfect.
Oh, and what did I just do? Okay, there you all are. Okay, back to you, Chuck. Chuck, you're muted.
So I did change the script, and that was it. That was all I had. So we can go right into the agenda and start the meeting.
Okay, and before we get started, I'm going to just list what the agenda items are, and we're starting at 7:08. And so I call the meeting to order at 7:08, and we're going to, the first two agenda items are 0 Small Lane and 2 Maple Street, and those both have been continued to, or been requested to continue until May 24th. The next agenda item is 16 Beverly Road, and Jeb is here to represent that.
One second, Martha.
Application.
We'll need a vote for 2 Maple Street to continue it to May 24th.
Right, yeah, I will get back to that.
Oh,
You
you're
just
going
want me
over
to
the
run
agenda.
down the agenda, right. So I'm running down the agenda as you
Oh,
asked.
you were given, yeah, so yeah, when we talked about it, you were just gonna do less, but okay,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
on
Okay.
track now. I got it.
All right, I can go back to less next time. Okay, then there's a vote about the Meadowbrook access easement. Then we have some old new business, and there are some discussion items that we will be doing, and then we'll finish up with minutes for approval. And we have 2 of the 4 sets of minutes have been shared with the Conservation Commission members, so we may be able to get 2 of them off our list of minutes waiting to be approved. Okay, back to the beginning. Zero Small Lane, did we already vote to continue that one to May 24th?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have to vote on that one, but we do have to vote on 2 Maple Street. So they have requested a continuance. Is there someone on the commission who can move to continue?
This is Brian. I move to continue to Maple Street to May 24th.
This is Bill McCann. I second the motion.
Okay, and Bill, you can start the voting.
Yes,
John Sullivan in favor.
Andrew
Eddie
Driven in
Adrian.
favor.
Brian Bowe in favor.
And Martha Moore in favor. Okay, now we're at 16 Beverly Road. And I will read the blurb while Chuck lets the applicant in. It is open the public hearing on a notice of intent filed by Jeb Pitzinger pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act, and or the Reading Wetland Protection Bylaw, Section 7.1.
He has a
For
PhD
installation-
in physics.
Physics,
But-
that's right.
Yeah, maybe nuclear, but from like the 1960s.
Yeah, I think his specialty was
I think that was Tony.
I
Um,
thought that was Walter.
Maybe that was Walter. I don't know who it was.
Okay.
it's
Installation
Walter.
of a single car garage with an accessory apartment, retaining wall. All of the work is within the 100-foot buffer zone to a bordering vegetated wetland. The application and plans can be viewed on the Conservation Division page under the current project, Assessors Map 31, Lot 36, DEP file number we don't have yet. Have you got a DEP file number yet, Chuck?
Sure, let me check on that and just continue on. Maybe a few minutes.
All right, so while Chuck checks on that, if we don't have a DEP file number, we cannot close tonight. We will have to continue to the next hearing.
I think we do have one, Martha. There's one on the printed agenda.
Okay. There's
The one
not
that Chuck
one.
sent out this evening.
Interesting. I thought that was the one I was reading off of.
Huh.
Okay,
Oh, no,
Um,
sorry, you're right. It's 270-nothing. You're correct.
Yeah. exactly. Okay, so, Jeb has been made a co-host, so Jeb, if you want to, turn on, yeah, there you go, camera, and you're not muted anymore. We did have several of us go out for a site visit, and, we can either start with you presenting your project, or we can start with, the impression of the people on the site visit, and Carl has just entered the waiting room. Okay, I'm admitting Carl. Okay, Carl is also a member of the commission, so we now have a 6th voting member available. Chuck, what do you think we should do first? Have Jeb present the project or have us
Sure.
present our site visit?
No, I think Jeb should present his project and then we should talk about the site visit and then ask any questions.
Okay, so
That-
do we have a picture of the project to put up?
Sure, so Jeb, did you want to present your project or would you like me to put up the plan?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to present anything on the screen, but I'm happy to talk to it. So if you could put something on the screen, that would be helpful.
Sure. I have this. I'm sure you're seeing it now.
Yeah.
Or this one here.
Yeah,
which-
that one, the second one probably is the most appropriate.
Okay.
So, yeah, happy to walk you through this. The proposed project is a detached garage, regrading, and I'm also trying to permit a deck at the same time. So I have an existing 10 by 10 deck, and it's in poor condition, so that's part of this as well. The parcel itself is about a little over an acre. The majority of it is in the adjacent wetland. The original construction had a large retaining wall that was presumably built to accommodate the lot. It was before I was the owner of the lot. That is within the 25-foot wetland buffer, as you can note here. So is the primary residence that exists. I am looking to, again, put a detached garage in, about 16 by 26, put a retaining wall in to increase the grade between the proposed structure and the house to level out part of the land, and then reconfigure the driveway as well. The few things you might have noted while you're at the house, there were a couple trees that have been removed from the property previously. I'll have to say that those trees were removed about 3 years ago. One of them was in very poor condition. I'll say I was a little bit inept as I didn't know the procedure. I did reach out to the town tree warden. He was at my property. We discussed the trees. He didn't inform me that I would have had to, contact Conservation Commission. I'm now aware that I probably should have done so. But 3 trees were removed from the property at that time. An oak, a maple, and a hemlock tree. And they were in poor condition, and they were, leaning toward the house. One of them, and then one of them was, kind of leaning toward one of the fence that's over the existing retaining wall. So they were taken out for purpose. Beyond that, let's see, what else we talked about here? I know in here in the submittal in the NOI, I also talked about infiltration. So the existing retaining wall, it has a series of weep holes at the base of it. Yeah, right in there. So they're spaced approximately every 8 feet or so. Presumably the retaining wall was built with a drainage layer behind it. So any water that would come in adjacent to the wall would dissipate. So no hydrostatic pressure would build behind the wall. They do run pretty consistently during storm events, so it does function. I know there is a desire for infiltration systems with projects that create additional impervious areas. I don't think that that's necessarily the appropriate solution in this case, because I don't think introducing any additional water behind the retaining wall is an appropriate solution. If the wall continues to function as designed, then the water just ends up, at the base of the wall anyway, and into the wetland. And then if it's not functioning properly, then build up hydrostatic pressure, and it could reduce the service life of the retaining wall, which is kind of integral to, my property. It holds up the house. So I have a relatively large lot. There's no catch basins in this area. Any water that might come off these impervious areas is going to infiltrate just in other areas of the property. So I don't think that that's necessarily something that we need to address specifically in this instance. That's from my opinion. And I think that's really the majority of what we've written about in the summary. Obviously, the wetland was delineated by a local firm. Project has the property has been surveyed, and I have the certified plot plan for that. So it's, I believe, that that's how we got all our figures here. To turn it back to you, Martha.
Okay. Thank you. That's all useful information. And we did have a group of us go out and took a look at the retaining wall and the area on your property and near your property. Is there anybody from our commission from that visit who wants to speak to what we saw?
I could take a stab at it if you'd like.
Okay, sure. Is that Bill?
That's Tony.
Tony? Okay, sure.
Okay. So on Monday, which was May 7th, I believe, 5 of us arrived at 16 Beverly at about 8:30 in the morning to conduct a site visit. And at the commencement of the visit, we rang the front doorbell and we knocked at the door, but nobody answered. And we waited a few moments, and then we conducted the site visit. We observed that the property slopes, I would say, gently downward from the road, approximately 70 feet, at which point we encountered a chain link fence above a retaining wall. The retaining wall was about 10 to 12 feet tall. We measured the back of the house as being about 12 feet from the retaining wall. The back of the driveway was about 39 feet from the retaining wall. At the base of the retaining wall were the wetlands. They almost abut it, but not quite. We measured that out to, I think, about 8 or 9 feet. But what that means is that, as the applicant indicated, that the project is fully within the buffer zone. But I believe it's outside of the wetland setback. To the left of the house, as we faced it, we saw a grassy yard where, as the applicant mentioned, there were some 2 large diameter trees that I saw. He mentioned 3, I only saw 2. But he mentioned they've been removed. And there is still an oak tree in the front of the yard. We followed a trail on the right side of the house down to the base of the retaining wall, and soil and leaf litter, some branches, and some other trash and debris were visible abutting the base of the wall. Some of the leaves and branches appeared to be yard waste. That's also where we found the blue wetland flags that mark the wetland boundary. We observed the wheat poles. They did appear to be functional. We also noted that at the midpoint of the retaining wall, about 2 feet from the top of the wall, there was, I would estimate, a 6-inch diameter black PVC or other plastic pipe extending from the wall. And this pipe appears to be connected to the downspout, which drains the back of the roof. And so it appears that rainwater from the roof is also directed to that outfall, where it discharges onto the mounded leaf pile and yard waste. To the right of the house, we observed what appeared to be a more recently constructed retaining wall, about 3 or 4 feet high. It kind of defined a terrace that was carved out from the land surface. And right now there's a trampoline placed there. Beyond that, there was some firewood, some equipment, some play structures that we saw northeast of the house on what appeared to be town land. And then the owner arrived shortly after 9 o'clock, and he answered some questions generally about the infiltration garden, and we left at about 9:10.
Does anybody else on the commission have anything to add? And thank you, Brian, for using your raise hand function. That's allowing me to see who's speaking up. So Brian.
Okay, I want to add a couple of things there. First, as far as the yard waste and what have you that's been dumped over the wall, there's a lot of it. It's not just some leaves, there's also grass clippings. There's at least one root ball from a potted plant. And it's, when we went down there, it's several feet worth of material down there. So I wanted to add some emphasis to what Tony was saying. Additionally, another thing we noticed is that there's a crushed stone, I'm going to call it a driveway, turnaround area or something off the property to the right. So once I finish my observations, I'd like Jeb to explain who built that and why and what have you. Also, we noticed underneath the hydrant over there, underneath the front spigot of the hydrant, there's a depression with crushed stone. So again, when I finish my observations, Jeb, if you could explain, if you know why that's there and who did that there. Another thing worth mentioning is Jeb explained to us that during rainstorms, the water comes down the street, then down his driveway, and there's a cut, for lack of a better word, for at the end of the driveway for that rainwater to flow onto the lawn and then towards the retaining wall. Let's see, I do want to say that when we went down to the base of the wall and looked up at that outflow pipe from the drainage off the back of the roof, that wall was stained a lot there. So that's clearly a lot of flow with some materials in it to cause sustaining. Also at the base of it, the flowing water has kind of carved out a depression, as you would see at the bottom of waterfalls and what have you. That's not actually in the wetlands, but it's within 5 feet or so of the wetland flag boundary. So I think that's the only additions. Oh, one additional thing, that tree that's in the driveway, Jeb, you're proposing keeping that. We did notice, actually, Tony is the one who noticed that there's significant rot in the V between the two leaders of the tree. So I would now stop talking and Jeb, if you could address maybe the crushed stone turnaround driveway, the crushed stone under the hydrant, that would be helpful.
Sure, no problem. So the driveway that's at the end of the road, or at the furthest part of the property, is not mine. It is on town land. It's on the land that's currently owned by the water department. So that's something that they use and maintain. I wasn't when I purchased the house, I wasn't fully aware of that. So as you guys have noted, there are some things of mine that are on their property, because initially, until I got this survey, I wasn't really fully aware of that. So we've kind of been utilizing that space as if it were our own. In discussions with the water department, when they're here maintaining things, they don't seem to have any issue with what's there. With that said, they recently did some hydrant testing and flushing just maybe about a month ago. As part of that, when they opened the hydrant up, you know, it washed out a lot of material. So what you see there is their fix. I've not touched it. They came back and decided that that's what they want to have there, as a, you know, the crushed stone and the berm that was installed there. That's all relatively recent, within the last month or so. Prior to that, it was just flat grassed area. So that's not something that I built, and I say not really even on the property. It's on their property. Regarding the tree that's out front, as I said, I've talked to the tree warden about that. That tree is actually on town property. I cannot remove it without paying a significant sum of money, and therefore I'm not intending on removing it. I'm aware that it is not in great shape. I pointed that out to the tree warden when I was having trees removed in the property, and that is what it is. I don't intend on making any additional, you know, activities regarding that tree. Regarding the lawn waste, yes, there's lawn waste down there. I've only been at the property for just a few years. The majority of that has been there for a long time. So yeah, it's a buildup over, you know, the 30 years the house has been here. Regarding the outlet, yes, that as far as I'm aware, that outlet is, I've never dug it up, but it certainly is functional during rainstorms. So I know that the leader from the roof goes in there. I don't know if the footing drain is also connected to that or not. It is approximately the appropriate elevation that the footing drain could be, but I don't know for sure. I think those are all of the things you addressed.
So Martha, those are just observations. After others have a chance to do their observation and ask some questions, I will have some questions, but that was just observations for now.
Okay. And Bill, you have your hand up.
Okay, consistent with what Brian just said, I actually have a lot of questions, but I understand that's not for now, just observations. So the one other observation I would add is where the PVC pipe comes out, drains whatever it drains, it looked like it was connected to the downspout. There's this significant depression at the base of the retaining wall. The only thing keeping serious soil scour from happening is the fact there happen to be leaves there. There's no structure at all to prevent soil scour. So I'll leave it with that observation for now. And when it's my turn, I have questions, as Brian does. Thanks.
Anybody else on the commission with observations? Okay, I do have one, and that is that at the front corner of the property where the arrow says 24.3 feet plus or minus, it looked like there's a white fence that goes out to approximately the property line from the side of the house. And I looked back at the aerial photos, and it would appear that that fence was put in sometime between 2015 and 2019. And being that this whole property is within the 100-foot buffer zone, it would have been appropriate to have the conservation administrator approve that fence back in 2015 to 2019 when it was put in. Okay, and yeah, from looking at the photos, it looks like the retaining wall that is also not shown on this plot plan, but is somewhere near the words 25-foot wetland buffer, was put in sometime between 2019 and 2021, based on the best I could observe from the photos. That's the little retaining wall with the trampoline inside it. And again, the retaining wall would be considered a structure and should have been approved by the Conservation Commission at the time it was put in. Okay, that was all my additional observations.
Would you like me to respond to those?
Sure.
The fence was an existing part of the property when I purchased the property, and let's see, that would have been 2019 is when I purchased the property. And then the retaining wall I did install, and I was not aware that it needed to be, I just was unaware of the protocol at the time.
Okay, similar to not being aware of the tree protocol.
Sorry.
Yep, well, now you know.
Yeah, and I said, I did call the tree warden. I was talking to the engineering department. You guys got to like coordinate better or something, because I was, I tried to do the right thing.
Yep. Okay. All right. So are we done with observations? Are there people who want to ask questions now? Bill.
Thank you. Thank you for the plans, for the information, and also for the information you provided during the site visit. So I'm just going to go through the document with some questions, and if you happen to have an answer as go along, that'd be great. If you don't, that's fine too. But let's start with when, based on the documents you received when you purchased the house in 2019, what's your understanding of when the retaining wall was built? And I'll explain to you the reason for that question after give you a chance to tell us if you happen to know when the retaining wall was built.
So from my understanding, the retaining wall was built to facilitate the construction of the house, which was, I believe, in 1990 to 1991. That's what, that's what's on the deed. So, when you look at the adjacent land, I just, it falls off pretty quickly. And I assume in order just to get the foundation in, they would have needed to do this work. So I believe it's from the same era.
Okay, thank you. And that sort of gets to my next question. I was wondering how you or the specialist you work with, this is from page 1, extending along the bottom and directed adjacent to the bottom of the wall is a shallow ridge of side cast material excavated when installing the retaining wall. Now knowing that this occurred in 1990 to 1991, it's not clear how the specialist would know that. We're talking about quite a few decades here. That's why the commission, the members were looking at what was out there. And so for example, there's a diagram, very helpful. Thank you for this, of the project. It's section A, existing and proposed grading, and it shows the base of the retaining wall. Thank you for scrolling up to that. The base of the retaining wall shows as flat, which isn't the case. We went down there, it's very much sloped. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Whereas in the upper property, above the retaining wall, you do show the kind of slope we saw and how it would change if the project were approved for the retaining walls and so forth. And that slope down at the base of the retaining wall will matter to us in this process in terms of what effect it may have on the nearby wetland. Because as we always emphasize in these meetings, that's our ultimate responsibility, is what's the effect of what's going on in the buffer zone on the resource area, in this case, the wetland. Okay, so thank you for that. And then On page 2, at the bottom, similarly, it says, last paragraph, while investigating the wetland resource area, OA documented soil profiles. Portions of the delineation coincide with the extent of the sidecast material excavated during the wall installation. And again, now hearing that's 1990 to 1991, I don't know how your expert confidently made such a conclusion, but that's okay. Just putting it out there. But let's go to page 3 and the proposed project. You've explained about the trees. And you've explained the garage, site work and deck will be in the 35-foot no structure zone, the 25-foot zone of natural vegetation. That's all true, but that raises a very important question. To me, one of the key questions of our hearing tonight, and that is, why is this being presented as a notice of intent and not as a request for a variance? And let me explain the reason for my question. Seems to me, based on the fact we're in the 25-foot and 35-foot zone, that what's really needed is a request for a variance, because strict compliance with the regulations simply isn't possible. And the reason it's important to ask about the variance is there are certain requirements for an applicant, and we assure you, we've had many applicants come forward, attempting to meet such requirements, where you have to explain alternatives that were considered. Were they reasonable? This is from section 2E of the local regs. What mitigating measures are proposed? And then there has to be an overriding public interest. Now, in the case of a single family home like yours, that can be mitigation, which improves the resource area. But there's no description of that here. So at least from my perspective, that's a very big issue. Then we go to, on page 3, you mentioned engineered infiltration is not recommended, and you have explained that. Your concern about the safety, the integrity of that retaining wall, that makes sense. But nevertheless, in your diagram, you happen to show at the top level a proposed infiltration garden, which sounds inconsistent with this concern about having any engineered filtration, because of course an infiltration garden is a kind of engineering of the landscape. But also, in the same vein, at the base of the existing retaining wall, past the existing grade, it says proposed native plantings. Now that actually looks like the sort of thing one would expect in a plan that's requesting a variance and suggesting mitigation. So I wanted to ask you, that proposed native planting, that proposed infiltration garden, was that in the spirit of offering some kind of mitigation, or is it something else? So I'll just pause and let you comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. So, let me just provide just a little bit of background. So I employed a few people. So Oxbow, I forget what they are, but they did the wetland delineation, and they provided their their assessment of what vegetation was there and things of that nature. And when you're talking about the side castings and that kind of stuff, that was their wording that they provided to me. And I think they got there by doing they did some soil plugs, they did some borings there, and just looked at what was coming back out of that. And in the areas of the walls where it's kind of built up right beyond it, it's essentially gravel, And I think what they mean by side castings is that when they did the original construction, they spread the gravel out to a certain degree. So when they were doing their investigation of trying to find hydronic soils, they didn't find those in that area, though the expectation is if they probably went deeper than that, potentially they would find them. And that's how they kind of got, from my perception, that's how they got to their conclusion of this was probably associated with the original construction, because you just don't have crushed stone lying about in a wetland, for a reason. So I think that's how they probably got to that. I can confirm with them if we need further evidence of what their explanation was, but I think that that's probably logical.
And it is helpful. I appreciate Jeb, you explaining specifically what you meant by the side cast consisting of gravel, because of course, as previously mentioned by others, we did see a lot of debris down there. So it's good to know what you specifically mean there. Thank you.
Yep. So regarding this, just to further that, I am an engineer myself. I'm a registered professional engineer. I'm a geotechnical engineer, so I know about structures and retaining walls and that kind of stuff. And I prepared this with the guidance of a few other people, but I don't know a lot. I only know the regs as I read them, and I don't know how these things tend to happen. So speaking with Chuck, he suggested, hey, you're going to have to provide some mitigation here. That's probably what would be appropriate. So that was this, as you said, this is my attempt at providing some amount of mitigation. Now, with that said, the retaining wall obviously provides a very definitive delineation between the work that I'm proposing and any impacts to the wetland. And what I'm suggesting here is that this project should have practically no implications to wetland. In that, we know, there should be no part of the construction that would leach into or otherwise pass this very definitive barrier, right? That was installed years ago. Regarding infiltration, as I said, we're adding impermeable area, but it's only going to drain to permeable areas. And with that acknowledgement, I put in this garden because I acknowledge that's where it's going to drain to anywhere. So instead of just calling it a berm or something, I said, well, I'll call this an infiltration garden. It's really just a garden to delineate between space, but it is it is permeable area, so that's what it will serve as, just as the rest of the lawn will serve as that. So I guess that was my my attempt at provide mitigation in the verbiage that I thought would be most useful to the commission.
Great, appreciate that. So looking at page 4, part D, zone of natural vegetation, second paragraph. It says, for example, the retaining wall provides a significant barrier against runoff. That's not necessarily consistent with what we saw visually. What I mean by that is we saw paths, water paths through the lawn, and they come up to the top of the retaining wall, but the lip is in some places barely visible, ½ inch to an inch at most. So you get even moderate rainfall. It's not at all clear that it would be, as described here, a significant barrier against runoff and that it's all going to infiltrate at the top of the wall. And this is based on our experience as commissioners seeing a lot of different properties. So just wanted to give you that feedback. The other thing is, it says in the italicized paragraph, the area at the base of the wall is unmaintained. It's unclear to us, given our charge to protect the wetland, why that would be a virtuous thing that no maintenance is done. I understand what you're saying about the retaining wall, but again, we're focusing on that adjacent wetland. We see water going in various ways. There's the seep holes, there's the black PVC pipe. There's also the very modest lip right at the edge of a sloping property. And others will probably speak to this, but what we saw in the soil that's at the base of that retaining wall, only part of it, we commented on this in the on-site, looked as if it were naturally vegetated. The rest did not. And if this is all going to work in the way the regulations intend, at least from where I sit, and others will speak, we would want to see something more there. On page 5, the proposed work, it reads, will all occur in developed portions of the property currently maintain turf. So no work will impact areas that are not currently developed. Our regulations do not treat maintain turf grass as if it's equivalent to building a structure, a patio, and so forth. In fact, one of the ways to know that's the case, this isn't a minor project, but just to illustrate for you how it's seen. For a minor project, for example, conversion of existing lawns to use as accessory to houses, it'd have to be located more than 50 feet away, and it'd be modest things like open slotted decks, et cetera, et cetera. I'm only pointing this out in 4G to show that, at least as I read this, the reasoning seems to be, well, it's all developed, including the turf lawns. So, nothing's really changing here of significance. And I don't think that's consistent with how the regs are written. And that just brings me back to the request for a variance. I really do feel, based on where everything's located within the 25 and 35 foot zones, that at least that has to be on the table. But I'll stop there, Martha, and give someone else a chance. Thank you.
Martha, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Brian has just raised his hand, so let's go for Brian next.
Yeah, I was just waiting for Bill to finish before I raised it. I don't want to be obnoxious.
Very polite, thank you.
So actually, to follow up on something that Bill touched on, Bill talked about alternatives. What alternatives have you considered, Jeff? In particular for the size of the garage, the extent of the driveway, things of that nature?
Sure. I mean, the limitations here are kind of twofold. So it's a garage. It has to be a certain size for it to function as a garage. At least this size is about as small as it has to get in order to get a vehicle in there. If I'm restricted by zoning to get any closer to the roadway. It's a 20-foot offset. I have almost exactly a 20-foot offset to the front of that structure, and then the same thing goes with the property to the side. It requires about a 15-foot offset. I have about a 16-foot offset. So as far as moving it further away from the wetland, there's not a lot of options there as that goes on any part of my property. And then so this is on the left-hand side here. On the right-hand side, obviously the property line necks in pretty quickly, and there's no opportunities there.
So Jeff, if I could cut in for follow-up. So how deep is that garage? I mean, on here, it's drawn essentially the same depth as your house. So can you give us actual dimensions?
You're asking the depth of the basement?
No, the garage, the proposed garage on the left-hand side. So, I mean, so 18 by 20, 16 by 20?
16 by 26.
So 20 feet deep is what you need to get a car in there?
About 24 feet deep would be a minimum to get a car in there.
Okay. And what are your dimensions on the patio? What's the square footage on that?
I don't have those in front of me. I did a calculation for the impermeable area. Like I said, it had if you look at the total area of the parcel, it's very minimal. Obviously, in the areas that are adjacent to the house, it's more significant. But I don't have it. My estimation is it was probably around 35 feet by maybe. Well, the house is 24 feet in dimension in that depth, so call it a bit more than that.
Okay, so on your plan, you have a list of various square footages and what have you. Chuck, can you scroll over and down to where those square footages are? I think it's
direct me a little bit, yeah.
And then back up.
Yeah, just over to the right-hand side. Yep.
Yeah, can you make those larger?
Sure thing. So Jeb, just so the commission understands, this garage functions as a accessory apartment also. So
Yes,
some
it's
of the sizing would be because of the combination between the two.
Yeah, it's also my desire to permit this as accessory apartment as well.
Maybe a little bit bigger for these tired eyes.
Okay, so yeah, I did break it out here a little bit in a little bit more specificity. So proposed garage is 443 square feet. Proposed hardscape is 821. Proposed pavement is 978. And then I've done the percentages on open space.
Okay, so let me ask you, what is included in your proposed pavement number?
It is the area of the driveway. So the entrance from the roadway, the horseshoe structure, and the area up to and beside the garage.
Okay, so when we were there, you were saying that your plan was to remove part of the right-hand side of the driveway in order to add things beyond the tree for your U. So I got the impression at least that you're expecting the driveway to be essentially the same size, yet on here, it's basically 2-to-1.
Yeah, it is larger. Yep.
So why do you need that much driveway for this? I don't understand where the need comes in.
It's a function of just so. I mean, if I keep the driveway where it is right now and then extend it to where the proposed um, garage is going to be, that's obviously an extension. So there's almost a doubling if I just did that. But that doesn't really work particularly well because the garage is quite a bit further toward the left property line. So talking to the engineering department, I can split my driveway. It creates a clearer shot into the front of it because I can't remove that tree that's on the property line there, and then beyond that, because I'm hoping to also say permanent accessory apartment, I need to have at least three parking spaces, which this would essentially allow. Beyond that, even if you put one in the garage, there wouldn't be a way for that car to get out being the problem with the other two. That's the intent.
Okay, so let's talk about the newer retaining wall for a bit. So first point I want to make is, at least from the aerial view, that wall also appears to go well off the property into the property next door. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Which one is this?
The newer retaining wall in conjunction with the trampoline?
No, it is. I've measured it subsequently to getting this, and it's on my property.
Okay, I didn't, from the aerial
Again,
view.
I didn't know when I built it, I did not have a surveyed plan, and I was when I purchased the house, I was under the impression that we owned more than we did. But subsequently, I've measured it out, and it's appropriate.
Okay, I mean, I can double check that on my own, but just when I used the GIS and zoomed in, it seemed to be beyond it.
Yep.
So what do you think we do with the fact that we have this recently installed retaining wall that wasn't approved?
You guys are guiding me here. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm looking at things as pragmatically as I can and saying, when I look at this, do I see a significant impact or an impact at all to the I understand there's the wetland, there's all these buffers, and I understand that, I've read through the regs, I understand what's there. I'm just trying to look at it pragmatically and saying, does the change at all impact or significantly impact what's the surrounding area? And I struggle to believe that it does. As I said, we have the retaining wall, the existing retaining wall that's there that creates this delineation. Going to your point as to whether there's enough freeboard on that to hold back water, I've never seen water flow over it like in a cascade fashion. It would be, if that were to be the case and it would happen regularly, it would be stained. You'd see it. You'd see sediment at the bottom and that kind of stuff. It's simply not there. So I just and so that's my perception, is just I look at these things as saying, if I look at this and say, does it have a detrimental impact to what is already there and corresponding to what's already there? I don't believe it is, and I understand that's not part of the regulations per se.
So let me ask another question. When was the outflow from the roof? When was that pipe punched through the wall?
I assume during the original construction.
I mean, it doesn't look like it, just from the fact that the weep holes, they were clearly built during construction, and this is a pretty jagged hole.
It's fair. I don't know. It was before I owned the property. It was an existing condition when I got here.
Because I mean, you're giving the impression that all the water flow from the property is infiltrated down to the base of the wall and what have you. But the reality is a lot of it is coming from the roof and going directly out to the wetlands through that pipe.
Yes, the roof does provide some impermeable area, you know, compared to the amount of water that flows down the street through my driveway and then down, it pales in comparison. But,
Okay,
I
so-
noted.
So to allow me to finish, in summary, what I'm seeing is a project where you want to basically double your pavement. You want to add a patio, not sure the size of it. You want to add a larger deck. You want to add a garage, which is also hoping to be zoned as a living space. And this is all essentially within the, or mostly within the 35-foot zone, and yet you're offering almost nothing for mitigation or something for that. I mean, is that a fair summation?
I would tend to agree with you. Yeah, I just, again, it's first time I'm trying to walk through this and understand what, you know, what you think mitigation looks like. You know, to some degree, I look at the space, you know, the existing areas that are, you know, below the retaining wall, and yeah, I mean, there's certainly yard waste down there, that's for certain. But beyond that, would it be like, you know, adding native plantings or otherwise? You know, I guess I can certainly look back into that if that's what needs to be happening. I'll be honest, I went down the road of an RDA last year. I was given the direction by this crew to pursue an NOI, and then so I've done that, and now I'm you know, now, you know, that's where I'm at now.
So I want to finish up so others can have a turn, but I just need to say that I'm uncomfortable with all of that work you're proposing. I would like to hear if you had different thoughts on alternatives, smaller patio, not a large deck, whatever, but somehow to reduce your impact. And so I'll let it go for there, allow others to speak, but just so you know where I'm coming from.
Is there anybody else who is waiting to speak? And Chuck, I'm going to admit Jack from the waiting room.
Sure. Yeah, take the screen off.
I don't know which Jack that is. Is Jack Sullivan expected tonight?
No, he wouldn't just say Jack. I don't expect, but he can add something to the chat, or when we get to public comment, raise his hand.
Okay. All right. Andrew Dribbin, you've got your hand up.
I do. Thanks, Martha. And thanks, Jeb, for presenting this before us. It's definitely an unusual project for us in that you have this large retaining wall. You're getting some comments from us that we have our 25-foot, and when you come back next time, we are really kind of concerned about that 35-foot line as well. So if you could add that to the map, the drawing, that'd be helpful. And those are the zones that we're most used to talking about. And your situation is so different that it's kind of confusing, to say the least. I understand what you're saying, like what you do up there doesn't have an impact on the wetlands in the same way than what we see frequently, where there's not a retaining wall and there's, well, just called continuity between, you know, your yard and the wetlands, and not having that continuity because of the wall is challenging. But just so you know, when we usually see a 25-foot line drawn between the flags and the yard, we don't want to see anything in there. Preferably, we want to see native plantings, if it's not like that already. And then the 35-foot zone, so 10 feet beyond that is a no-build zone. So now you could see how your project poses if now hopefully you're getting understanding that that's like we kind of work from that basic formula. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's like what the regs say. And to make it easier for us, since it can get complicated fast, that's how we kind of go about things. So you have a lot of proposed work within the 25-foot wetland buffer, which is generally a no-no, and also obviously the 35-foot. And I'm not sure what to do about it, honestly. So I'm hoping, we'll ask Chair that with your approval, we could continue it, because I think there's further discussion that needs to be had. Obviously, I agree with Brian, and it goes to when you ask for, or if you ask for a variance, you have to show us like what alternatives you've tried, and some of them are, you know, you're asking essentially now you're coming to ask us for a variance, and we may or may not accept it, but one of them would be to push the garage forward and be asking the zoning department for a variance, right? And then we could decide whether or not we want to push back on that, and you could go forward with that and whatnot. But the size of things, there's that little notch at the back of the garage, which I'm guessing is I don't know, but that pushes you further into the 25-foot zone. So when you're thinking about how to potentially move things around, make it as much as possible, especially the garage, to be outside of the 25-foot wetland buffer zone. I'm gonna stop there for just for that kind of stuff. But the one thing that I'm just thinking about is this wall. You say you're engineers, so maybe you could help me with this, but concrete has a lifespan. I don't think we're nearing it for this, but it was 1990. You know, usually like 50 years is something like that, a concrete wall. It looks healthy-ish. I'm not an engineer, so maybe you know better, but I mean, you definitely see staining on it. I don't see any cracking, but what is the future of this wall? What do you think the lifespan is of that retaining wall?
Well, I mean, just addressing the wall itself. There's a crack at the far, in this instance, the far right hand corner, right at that 90-degree turn. That's a very common place for increased load, and so it's not uncommon to get a crack in the concrete, and then the reinforcing then takes care of it after that. There's some cold joints that are evident in the wall. You can tell from where they poured initially, and then didn't consolidate it well enough on subsequent pours. So those are things that you look at. This is a robust wall, especially for a residential application. You would expect to see a wall of this magnitude in a transportation, setting or something like that. In which case, if it were built to a typical AASHTO, standard, it'd have a 75-year design life. But the reality is that luckily for all of us, most of the bridges and retaining walls that we drive over are well within that and extend beyond that. So my expectation is this wall will be here longer than the useful life of the house. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
That's helpful to hear. I mean, I agree. That's part of why it's so odd for us. It is not a typical structure we see in a residential area. And it's not, the strange thing is, it's not like it was built in the 60s or something like that. It was the 90s. So it was like 6 years later, and this wouldn't have been possible. You can't do this anymore. And this is pretty intense as it is. So,
yeah, I mean, anecdotally, my neighbor has been at this property for 40 years, his property for 40 years. He saw this whole construction, he's told me about it. Yeah, it was some significant earth moving equipment that was, sitting in the wetlands. That's what happened.
right. So that's where I understand your point, honestly. The damage was done 30 plus years ago. So what's going to happen up top now is questionable in my mind. I need to think about it more and maybe ask our circuit rider. I need to process it more personally. But I would appreciate if you came back and kind of showed us some potential alternatives to how you could potentially move things around. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Tony has his hand up.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight and for answering all the questions that have been presented towards you. This is a fairly in-depth discussion, and you seem to be very well prepared. I wanted to say that I think there's an opportunity here with this project to improve the current hydrological connection between the property and the abutting wetland. We've spoken a little bit about that 6-inch approximate PVC pipe, near the top of the retaining wall. We've asked some questions about where runoff from the road that gets directed through your driveway and it cuts into your lawn a little bit, where that ponds up, how that goes over the wall. I think that when that retaining wall was constructed, it created a disconnect, a natural disconnect with the wetland, where I think some of the proposed work may actually provide an opportunity to fix some of that, to improve the hydrological connectivity, by way of managing that water flow a little bit better. Finding a way for that water from the top of the wall to dissipate its energy as it hits the ground, to provide an opportunity for better infiltration or better filtering, to treat some of the road runoff contaminants and some of the runoff from your roof. So I would just like to encourage my co-commissioners to consider that when deliberating, what alternatives they'd like to see. But I think we can right a wrong with this.
Any
You will-
other commissioners? Oh,
Yeah, just to add, you will be increasing the amount of impervious surface. But I'd like to see a little bit more about how that water could be treated and how that improvement could possibly be a benefit to the abutting wetland.
Certainly, I guess that's one of the reasons I kind of put this infiltration garden in, assuming that I would kind of direct runoff toward that, which would be further away from the retaining wall. It would infiltrate in that area, and then by the time it got there, hopefully it got to the retaining wall and to the weep holes, it would be in a better it would block the water that was coming down the roadway. First of all, it would provide an area where it would either move it to the lawn area, or that area it would infiltrate there, versus running down the lawn closer to the driveway, or closer to the existing retaining wall. So that was my thought process there. And then the patio would, again, I could direct water either way with that. I can direct it back toward the infiltration garden, or that area close to the front of the property, or direct it otherwise. That retaining wall would have it provides some alternatives in that respect.
What about the roof?
If from my perspective, obviously the easiest thing to do is maintain the existing condition. If we're worried about that, then if it's simply connected to the downspout, which would be the majority of the water anyway, I'm happy to direct that to a rain barrel, and and then a hose, and have it infiltrate in at the downspout. It makes no difference. I'm fine with that.
Thank you.
If that's something, again, kind of lead me down the road of what you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think I need to see a little bit more about that infiltration garden, how the hydrology would work, how much, what's the storage capacity there? How quickly would the water infiltrate? You're talking about a lot of water, but potentially during some of our, our April storms, or July thunderstorms, periods where it's raining 2, 3, 4, 10 days in a row sometimes. That's a lot of water going into a small area. I'd like to see what the proposed permeability would be, what the infiltration would be, and what would keep that water directed downward and not coming out of the other side of the proposed retaining wall on the back side of the patio. I'm just not sure where that water's going. I'm not convinced it's going to go straight down to the base of the wall and out the weep holes.
Tony, are you looking for an answer from Jeb today, or for that to be something he puts into his plan when we continue to the next meeting?
I'd like to see that continued.
Okay.
Get a little bit of thought into it.
And any more things from you, Tony, or shall I move on to Bill?
I yield the floor to Bill.
Okay, Bill.
And so Jeb, in the spirit of giving you some practical suggestions, what we typically see in a case like this, when there's going to be an expansion of structures in the 25, 35-foot zone, in terms of mitigation, we often look for, well, what square footage are you changing elsewhere that is of benefit to the wetlands? So planting of vegetation, the scour area underneath that black pipe and so forth. So one place and I think some others would encourage you to look is at the base of the wall, between the wall and the wetland, and thinking about, well, is it possible to get more natural vegetation in here? Is it possible to put some device in there that will prevent scour from the black outfall pipe? I mean, we saw the weeps and they're not presenting the same kind of issue. You don't see a concave spot there like you do under that. So those kinds of practical things we would encourage you to think about. You gave us the percentages in the 90s because it looks as the old property. That makes sense. But we'd encourage you to actually look at the square footage at the core of the project, what you're adding, and then just ask, thinking creatively, is it possible that I could do planting of native vegetation and so forth in a way that may benefit the wetland, because I've got that area between the base of the wall, for example. I'm not stepping on what others have said about other things you can look at, but I'm just trying to give you additional practical suggestions to think about in terms of mitigation.
Could you clarify something for me? Would it be appropriate? Obviously, the distance between the wall and the wetland delineation is quite tight. Is it appropriate for me to suggest plantings within the wetland?
It is sometimes possible to do that, so you could have a look at that as well. When we were down there, if you walk along the base of that long wall, we saw an area that, and Martha, you might have a recollection of this too, where there seemed to be some native vegetation, some moss, but other parts of the wall that seemed to be completely absent. And so thinking about, can more of the base of the wall look that way? And indeed, as you're suggesting, Jeb, in some cases, another degraded area is identified in a wetland. And so the offer is, well, I can do some work there. This is a degraded area of the wetland that can be, improved. And that's the kind of mitigation trade-off that can be appealing, because again, it's just the net benefit to the resource area. So I appreciate you raising that as well.
The reason I mentioned is kind of like talking about these castings, these side castings, right? If you move a lot of that, whatever the yard waste that's there, then it's crushed stone. There's not going to be anything that really is going to take to that. And probably frankly, the reason that some of the plants have grown there is because they've grown in yard waste. That's why I'm asking. If it's not likely I'm going to be able to get anything to take that close to the wall. It's going to have to be further away.
And that kind of creative thinking is appreciated, because obviously the casting isn't a natural part of the area. To the extent some of that can be removed, you're improving the resource area. Again, that kind of thinking is what we typically look for. Thanks. That's it for me, Mark.
Hey, Walter has his hand up.
As a fellow homeowner, what concerns me the most of what I've heard today is you say the water is running down Beverly Road across your property. Is there any way to prevent that from happening? That goes beyond this commission, but I mean, I wouldn't want that.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to mitigate that by changing the grades a little bit and directing it, onto either the part of my lawn that's a bit further down, or really what happens if the water comes down, either enters my driveway or goes beyond my driveway and goes into the next driveway that's down there that's owned by the water department. And then typically it infiltrates in that area, you know, it ponds in that area and infiltrates. So it's you know, the water flowing through the lawn actually doesn't bother me that much. I'm not, you know, I don't take great care of my grass. You guys were here, you saw that. It's just a matter of you know, it's just a matter of trying to make it kind of work so that way you know, it's not muddy basically.
Your new design shows a driveway.
Yep.
Do you anticipate the water is going to coming down to your driveway and infiltrating your garage? Or do you anticipate it going over to that infiltration garden?
So if you want to scroll down to the cross section at A, I've tried to show it there a little bit. So just up just a little bit. So I'm proposing to set the garage at slightly higher than the grade of the roadway. And then there'll be some filling, as you can see on the right-hand side of this, that essentially will match grade. So that way, you know, the driveway will be slightly higher than the roadway. That's my hope.
Thank you.
Just a comment based on what Walter said. I have seen a road where there's a little bit of a lip at the driveway going into the property so that the water stays on the road and continues down the road. So if you're paving your driveway, you might want to grade it so it actually has to go up and over, you know, a 3 or 4 inch rise before you get into your driveway. And that would steer the water to the town water department land, which would be better than having it running across your property.
Okay. Yep, noted.
And I don't see a lot of other hands popping up, and I've been taking notes while everybody's been talking and come up with a bunch of questions. Can we go back to the next plot up? Chuck, scroll up. Yeah, right there. You've got a picture here of Beverly Road and then the property line. So is the paved road ending down near the words Beverly Road, and then the driveway you have to install actually goes quite a ways off your property line to meet Beverly Road?
Yeah.
Okay. But then the way I see where the tree is located, existing tree to remain, looks like it's inside your property line and not on the town property. So, but you said, Mike Hannaford said it is a town tree.
So I didn't have a hard survey at the time. You know, we were out here, we pulled some tape off of some existing monuments, and we generally agreed that at least half the tree or proportion of the tree was on town land. Now I have this, yeah, if we're gonna hash, you know, talk inches, then maybe it is my tree, but I wasn't gonna go down that road and try to argue that.
Okay. I'm just thinking, given the rot that we saw at the base of that tree when we were there, though I think it's always good to save oak trees, I'm afraid that you may be coming back to the commission in not too many years to say, yeah, this tree is now in grave danger of collapsing onto my house or across the street onto the neighbor or something like that. So, and looking at one of the trees that you had taken down already, which has a big center rot in the middle of it, that
Yeah,
concerns me.
that tree was in much worse shape, and that's why we targeted that one.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious about, to the left of the driveway, you've got a property line, and then between the driveway and the property line, you've got another line that's not labeled in any way. Can you tell me what that line is?
Sorry, that was a drafting error. What that represents is actually the hedgerow that is between the two properties. There's a series of hemlock trees that create a hedgerow there, and that's what that line is supposed to represent, but it should have been
Okay.
a different line type.
Yeah, so sometimes that's shown sort of wiggly like a cloud or something like that. Okay,
Exactly,
so
yeah.
that's the existing vegetation. So
Yeah.
you don't want your driveway any closer to the property line than the existing vegetation.
Yeah, I'd prefer to maintain all that vegetation.
Okay. And are you on town sewer?
I am.
Okay, so we're not worrying about increased inflow from the additional accessory apartment
Nope.
into
nope.
the water. Okay. Usually when people present plans to us, they draw elevations on the plans, and I see you've got some point elevations of what's existing now, I presume. But it would be good to also draw some contour lines and some elevations on those contour lines so that we could see the shape of that infiltration garden. Normally, we would see that like the downhill end is higher than the center so that the water gets kept in that garden. And here you've got 99.2 at the driveway edge and 98.59 at the corner of the house. So
Yeah,
if it's
well,
going to
that's
be a
why
rain garden, it would want to be kind of bowed a little bit.
okay. That's why I provided the cross section, because I was aware I didn't have contours on here.
Yeah, yeah. But I think in the cross section, you're showing your rain garden going up as a mound, and I was thinking it really ought to be a bowl. And that bowl would catch the water and prevent it from running across the patio.
So actually, because of the way that I thought this was going to work, because the driveway was a bit higher than the roadway, I wasn't anticipating a lot of water coming from that way. I was thinking the water from the patio would go toward that infiltration garden, I guess is
Mhm.
where my mind was in that.
Okay, but in that case, we still want a bowl-shaped infiltration garden. We want something that will fill with water and slowly let it down.
Okay, yeah, I mean, understood.
Okay. And where are you proposing to have any soil stockpiles during the project?
The reality is that I have such a small property line. I wouldn't expect much soil to be stockpiled here. I talking to an excavator, I believe most of it will be removed from site.
Okay. But for example, with your garage, you're going to want to put some footings in and then backfill to the footings. So where would you store it while you wait to backfill?
Um, uh, I'm not, I guess, I mean, the answer would probably be somewhere between the house and the garage. I think is really the only place it could possibly go, I suppose.
Okay.
But again, I think you know, talking to the excavator in the other room I have here, I believe most of the material will be removed from site, and then, you know, drainage material will be brought back in to backfill footings and that's my expectation.
Okay.
And then the other thing to be aware of is that I'm proposing a full basement in the garage, not just frost footings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a full basement, then a garage floor at the level of the driveway, and then
Yep.
the accessory apartment above the garage?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. And I guess my only other question is, I know you have the retaining wall across most of the backyard, but it does end before you get to the property line and the hedge on the left, upper left side. And I'm thinking you might need some erosion control there while you're doing the digging to put in the full basement for your garage.
Yeah, agreed.
And I also, a lot of people are talking about putting some sort of splash zone underneath where the black pipe comes through the wall. I also was thinking maybe something like a rain barrel at the bottom of the downspout to not have all the water from the roof pouring out through a hole in the wall and down into the wetland.
Yeah, my preference would to minimize the work I would have to do down below that wall. So I think my preference would be to add a rain barrel. Then do work as far as a splash zone or something down there, which, you know, it's hard to get, you know, it's hard to do the work down there. It's difficult to get things down there and otherwise. So.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of other people have spoken about the leaves and debris at the bottom of the wall. I also noticed that somebody has put leaves on the town water property, water department property across the street from you and closer to the woods there. So in general, we really encourage people to take their leaves to the town forest, into the compost area where we're collecting those things, not right next to the wetland. And in many cases where we see people who have debris on the wetland side of the 25-foot zone or inside the wetland line, we ask people to remove that debris. I don't know how practical that would be to take some of those tree branches that are at the bottom of the wetland, of the retaining wall, or some of the leaf litter. Normally, we don't ask people to dig down where it's already decomposed, but remove that top layer that's been most recently added to kind of get it back to its natural state. So that would be something to consider, what the practicality would be of that, and certainly to ask you to make sure that no more material goes over the wall.
Yeah, I think the practicality of removing some of the limbs and that kind of stuff that have accumulated down there over the years isn't unreasonable. I would hesitate to try to move anything that was like leaves or smaller debris, just because I think actually it is covering a lot of the crushed stone that's down there and actually providing a bit more of a natural layer of something that can actually grow something.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I would like to also chat with all my neighbors about not putting all their stuff down the road either, but it is what it is. Actually, I get, and this is a totally different subject, but we actually get a lot of people that just drive their trucks down and start unloading things as well. That I ask them not to do that.
Okay. We have been known to put no dumping allowed signs on conservation land. This is not conservation land, but maybe that would be something that the town water department might want to do something about.
Fair.
Okay. I was just thinking, if you're gonna have heavy equipment in there for building this garage, it might be that the arm of a backhoe could reach down with one of those claw things and pick up some of those branches. So I don't know how long the arms on these backhoes are and what their reach is, but that would be your best chance while you're doing the construction.
Yeah, maybe so. I think I'd probably just remove it manually. But that's, if that's something that's desirable to the commission, then we can work that through.
Yeah, I will let other people put their 2 cents in about that. And we haven't yet heard from Chuck, so I would really like to give Chuck a chance to talk about his concerns and questions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Jeb, for presenting tonight. This is a lot of information. It's a big project. It seems to be taking up a majority of the usable buildable space on your property. And I know that you talked to the town tree warden, but I was wondering if you talked to the engineering department and had an understanding if you met the Aquifer Protection District requirements. And those are simply, you can have lot coverage of 15% or 2,500 square feet. And then you have an opportunity to infiltrate. And I know that you said during this presentation that infiltration wasn't something that you thought would be needed because it ends up going into the same spot. But before we got into that conversation, I was wondering what the engineering department said. The other thing that I noticed is the 2 driveways. I feel like there's a different way to do these driveways. I think convenient. It would be convenient if 3 cars had to be there to have this setup. But it's a lot of impervious surface and one curb cut that incorporates the front of the garage and whatever that is on the side of the garage, would eliminate a lot of this asphalt. And then the proposed patio. Again, I'm wondering why it wouldn't be, you know, I guess I'm not convinced why it couldn't be pervious. And when I think of this, when I think of this area, when I look at it from the street, there's just a lot of pavement. And I know we don't have a sustainability section to our regulations, but the only thing that keeps popping in my head is this heat island, and you're creating a lot of impervious surface. And so for me, that I'd like those things to be looked at. Maybe you can change some things around, but specifically to talk to the engineering department. So I don't know if you went into that about if you went into that with either Ryan or anyone else down there and talked about, I think there's a limit between entrances for a driveway, maximum 22 feet or something like that. But if you can speak about that, that would be good.
I have talked to the engineering department about kind of bifurcating the driveway, and generally their position is don't do it, and it's because of a safety reason. But because this is the last house on a dead end, they said, well, you wouldn't really, the purpose of that, of that law, bylaw is not really in keeping with what you have here. You have no through traffic, so they didn't take. Um, First blush, they said, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't be able to accommodate this as long as the curb cut was an aggregate no more than the allowable width. I don't know anything about the first topic that you brought up, and I haven't discussed that with them. And could you just repeat it again? There was something about the aquifer district.
Yeah, so there's an aquifer protection district, and it has to do with impervious cover on a lot, and that needs to be looked into. And like I said, before we get into it, it would be good to know that the engineering department agrees with your statements.
Yeah, I actually believe that this particular lot does not fall within the aquifer protection.
Oh, I checked. It certainly does.
Okay, all right. I guess
I can bring it up if you want to look. We can do that when someone else is talking. I can run to that real quick and let you know. Let's see if I have anything up here.
And just, I mean,
Quickly.
regarding the infiltration, we could do pervious everything here. That we could do that, but the end result is, in my opinion, exactly the same. Whether it infiltrates the exact spot that the rain comes down, or whether it comes off, otherwise, versus it travels, 15, 20 feet and then into an area that is pervious. It's not going into a catch basin. It's not being directed into another hardened surface, where it's going to be carried off and then dumped somewhere else. So the actual necessity to do pervious pavers or pervious driveway, I just don't see the argument for it.
So you can see the Aquifer Protection District there.
Okay.
It's a lot. With the size of your lot, that may save you, but it needs to be discussed. We need to know where you are with that also. It's not something that this commission looks at, but I'm wondering if you have to infiltrate, what options would be suggested by the engineering department. The other thing with the driveway and the double entrance, it seems to be completely on top of the root zone of that tree. And that's going to impact the tree. And if you're keeping the tree and so I'm going to consider that tree a tree that needs to be protected, and you're impacting the root zones by paving over it. So it's going to lose oxygen. So that, to me, needs to be looked at also. And hopefully with the Aquifer Protection District, the comments about the driveway, the fact that you want to save the tree, we are going to lose some of this driveway, a little bit of this driveway. Maybe it can be reconfigured. And the two entrances, when I think about it, what I see is only a second area for someone to park by the road and be able to leave without interrupting the other two cars. So maybe that could happen on the street since you live on a dead end. Anyways, those are my comments. I think we have a lot here. I'm not sure all these comments can be addressed at the next meeting. I would suggest that you reach out to me during next week just to make sure you have them all, and then you can get them back to us. Our distribution would be Thursday of next week. The commission would like to review your comments. So sometimes it's not possible to continue to the next meeting. You may have to skip off for 2 meetings.
Okay, so I've taken my own notes. Will you guys be providing bullet points, or how does that work?
No, we'll just make sure if you had anything that you missed, we can compare notes just to make sure you get the full list. But if you think you have them adequately, then that's fine with me.
Yep. And then just regarding the parking, the zoning law requires me to have adequate space if I'm going to add an accessory apartment. So I mean, I do believe I need to have at least 3 spaces. I'll look into that and validate that, but I do believe that's going to be my response.
So yeah, it's not 2 entrances. It's one
No,
in the
it's not
garage,
2
one in front
entrances.
of the garage, and one next to the garage. There's 3 spots as I see it. And it eliminates one side. I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I just wanted to say that so you knew where I was going and not just seeing those spaces. But it's all about just looking into it. So if you came up with an answer to that, I'd like to hear it. Thank you.
Okay.
Martha?
So our next meeting is the 24th, and the meeting after that will be the 14th, because there are 5 Wednesdays in May. So we could continue to the 24th, and if you're not ready by the 18th, we can just continue again to the 14th, or we can just vote right now to continue to the 14th. What do you think is going to be more practical for you, Jeb?
I think a couple of weeks, so the 14th is probably the most appropriate for me.
Okay. All right. So are there any last questions or comments before we take a motion to continue to June 14th?
Martha, I think you want to just ask if there are any public comments.
Ah, that's true. Are there any members of the public here who need to make comments? Don't think I see anybody other than us. Okay, but thank you for reminding me. I often forget that piece. Okay, so no members of the public are present. Chuck.
Jeb, so it would be important to go to the regulations, find our variance section and fill that out. There's not a form. There's 3 questions there, and just submit that, memo style.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else with anything that we need to do tonight?
This is
Okay, so
Brian.
can I
I'll make
have a
the
motion?
to continue to June 14th.
This is Bill McCants. I'll second.
And Bill, you get to vote first. Every time tonight.
You're on mute, Bill.
Bill McCants in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Andrew Gibbon in favor.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. And we seem to have lost Carl. We admitted him and something happened. Okay.
Yeah, Carl let me know that something came up at his house and he'll try to return, but he's out for now.
Okay, so there's only currently 5 voting members of the commission here, so we've all covered that. Okay, thank you very much, Jeb, and we'll see you on the 14th.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, our next order of business is Meadowbrook Access Easement. Do we have anything on that, Chuck?
Yeah, just once again, the paperwork didn't come in. We'll have to push this to our next meeting. This is, all indications say we should have it soon, but we don't.
Okay. Old new business, any violation notices or yard waste or anything like that we need to talk about tonight?
I don't think so. No real advances as far as that goes.
Okay. Moving on to discussion items. Chuck, do you want to talk to us about the Leaning Tree 95 Main Street issue?
I can. So this is, so Leaning Tree is up towards the Stoneham end of town. Um, and so Leaning Tree Lane called up and they had let us know that 95 Main Street for a number of years had a dumpster that's right at the corner of their property. 95 Main Street is a commercial building with a dumpster that's enclosed only on two sides. The back side and the side of it was never enclosed by a fence. And typically, as according to the residents of Leaning Tree, that the trash blows out of it and blows into an area that's lawn and wetland and I guess for years they've been picking it up, but finally they wanted the town to do something about it. So we went out there with Martha and Brian and looked at it. The trash wasn't over the top. There were some things out there. I guess Leaning Tree had been cleaning it up quite well, and recently the owner of 95 Main Street had cleaned it up, along with getting a new dumpster company. The entire town got a new dumpster company, and so did 95 Main Street. So this looks in good condition now, except there's some historic trash in the wetland or the wetland buffer. So what we had decided to do is to ask the residents of Leaning Tree to let us know the next time it happens and to take some pictures, and pictures well enough so we can associate the trash with what's blown around on their lawn and in the wetlands. I have the health department look into this, and they've sent out a letter requiring the dumpster to be fully enclosed. And inspections by the health inspector will be once a week for a while, and then every 2 weeks just to monitor it during this time. So I think we have enough actions out there just to make sure that things are going well. And so far, according to the health inspector, the last inspection they made, everything was clean. So that's the report. I don't know if there's any follow-up by Martha or Brian.
I have one question. So the health department, I imagine they're just inspecting around the dumpster itself. So then they're not actually looking into the wetland, in other words.
They won't be walking in the wetlands, but if they see anything there, they'll let me know. And
So you
I
are going
think
to
that,
look.
yeah, the Leaning Tree residents condo commission, they'll certainly give us a call. We have exchanged each other's email address along with the health department. We're taking this on together. So it was described as a huge problem, but when we got out there after the cleanup, it wasn't much of a problem at all. I would say about a half hour's work would have cleaned that up between a couple of people. And it may be getting more difficult as the ground cover grows in, which I think was garlic mustard, now that I think about it.
Yeah, but also I think part of it was just frustration on the residents' part. I think they were tired of doing it. So you're right, what was there wasn't terrible, but I think they were tired of cleaning it up. So I think it's more that buildup than the actual current state.
Yeah, trash is tricky. I mean, a few pieces of trash, it's hard to draw the line. I mean, we can definitely make the most out of it we can, but a few pieces of trash scattered out over a wide area, you know, you're gonna have to get the whole commission to consider that that's an alteration.
Yeah.
So I think
It
the
is,
best thing to do
however,
is to
a
work
lot-
with these people and make sure that they're monitoring the trash.
A lot of that trash, however, was non-biodegradable plastic gloves from the medical offices and things like that. So,
And
you know,
fast food containers.
right. Yeah, some of it was biodegradable, the loaves of bread, but some of it was not. So yeah, and I think the question is who's responsible for cleaning it up? And the homeowners association was saying it's not their trash, it's clearly coming from the dumpster, so the people who own the dumpster should be the ones who pay for the cleaning up. I think that was part of their frustration, is that it's costing them time and energy and money to get it cleaned up, and it's not their trash. But hopefully the fence around the dumpster and the new design of the dumpster, which might be less likely to have trash blow around, and possibly a more responsible dumpster company that actually comes when they have to, that whole combination might reduce additional trash from going into the wetland. Okay, if anybody is needing to say more about that, please do the raise hand function. Otherwise, we'll move on to Bill McCants and section C on the discussion items about section 3D in the regulations.
Okay, thanks, Martha. So just to remind everyone, Section 1 of the Reading Wetland Protection Regs say that from time to time after a public hearing, the commission can amend the regs, and it's intended to formalize actions the commission has taken to address recurrent issues. That's one reason. It can be to clarify language used in the regs, and the other is to maintain consistency with the Wetlands Protection Act, but that's really not on the table here. And we had some discussion about this. Chuck checked in with the town. We can do this as long as it's formally posted before we have a hearing on it and so forth. We don't need to have a subcommittee. We don't need to go to town meeting, etc. And I had said really the idea is to clarify language. And so a good example of that, I've said a number of times, started coming to meetings in January. I was appointed a member in March. One of the reasons I enjoy serving on a volunteer body like this is you learn so much from each other, because people come with different backgrounds, but with a common interest in wetlands and conservation. And mine happens to be in law. I've been doing administrative law for 23 years now. Most of the time in civil rights, but a good chunk of time in environmental. When I was on the Belmont Conservation Commission, I tried to keep track of case law for the commission, and I'll try to do similarly, hopefully in a helpful way here. Well, this is helpful to us today, this case that was shared with you, and hopefully you got a chance to at least glance at it, but even if you didn't, I'll try to focus on what's important from the case for our discussion today. So this is our neighbor, Linfield, and the decision was in 2022 by the appeals court. And there was a history between Linfield and this company that bottled water out of a spring. That is, there have been several cases between them. And I like something Chuck has said. I think it's something to live by in this kind of work, is never let it get personal. Always keep neutral and so forth. And sometimes one party or the other can let emotions run away with them. I don't want to say that's exactly what happened here, but even the court noted there was a history between the Boston Clearwater Company and the Conservation Commission of Linfield. Okay, let's put that to the side and look at what happened here. So there was an enforcement action by the Linfield Conservation Commission against this company because they'd placed a bench in a no disturb zone. And they'd also dragged a cross up a hill, disturbing the soil and so forth in the buffer zone. And so the enforcement order was that they had to address all these things they'd done. And the company said, our actions haven't had any material impact on the wetland, and you should rescind your enforcement order. It's unfounded and baseless. But the Conservation Commission stood its ground and said the placement of the granite benches and the cross were not the reason for the enforcement order, which was a little confusing. But then they talked about clearing and disturbing of a no disturb buffer zone. So I want to pause here. We hear people refer to a no disturb zone, a no structure zone. Now at Linfield, they actually use those labels in their local regs, which I want to suggest to you is useful. Parties coming before this commission regularly use these terms anyway. So for clarity, I think I want to suggest it could be a good idea to actually add them to the appropriate portion of our local regs. What we currently have in section 3D is our zone of natural vegetation. That's pretty straightforward. But then in item 4, section 3D4, to protect the integrity of the zone of natural vegetation, including associated root system, canopy, etc., no new foundations, including footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures, shall be permitted within 10 feet of the ZNV. And then it talks about associated structures. Well, picture this section actually talking about, we could decide what to call it, but the 35-foot no disturb zone. We could insert it with parentheses, put a label on it, and it'd be understood in that context for both the ZNV and this 35-foot zone. It makes it clear that the commission has the discretion to make those even broader as needed. So the defined term wouldn't say, oh, you're stuck with 25 feet. It's just a way of labeling the information. And this is true, for example, for Linfield and other towns that use these labels. They still leave themselves that discretion because every site is different. But I want to suggest to you, as someone who was new to the commission trying to sort this out, I actually had to ask, where's this 35-foot no disturb zone? And then when it was explained to me, if you read 3D carefully, you'll find it, oh, that made sense. But this is where we get back to that concept of clarity. Could we make it clear? The other thing we have is interest. Why do we have this zone of natural vegetation? Why do we have this additional 10-foot no build zone, right? We're trying to protect the wetlands, and we think the closer you get to it, and I looked at the bylaws of all 6 of our neighboring towns, and there are others that also have this, the closer you get to the wetland, the more protective you need to be. That's really the interest underlying this. Well, if you look at our tree bylaw, it only mentions the buffer zone, the 100-foot buffer zone. It doesn't happen to mention the ZNV. It doesn't happen to mention this 35-foot zone. And I have to think that that was just a simple oversight, if you will. But we consistently look at it in the same way. Why wouldn't we, right? If we're thinking about tree replacement, the same interests apply. The closer we get to the resource area, right, the more concerned we likely are about tree replacement. So again, something just to think about, and something very consistent with what we see in neighboring towns. So what was surprising, going back to the case, is The court upheld Linfield's decision, but not for the reasons Linfield had asserted. Linfield was saying, you violated our local bylaw. And the court said, no, they didn't. But they did disturb the 100-foot buffer zone under the state regs. So you're still going to prevail. I'm certain this came as a surprise to the Conservation Commission there. But what the court did was unpack what their local regs said. So they had a no disturb zone, 25 feet of a resource area, and a no build zone of up to 50 feet. That's what their local rules said. So the court then looked at these alleged violations of these local regs. We are not convinced, the court said, that the placement of the benches, which was done by hand on level ground and did not involve any digging or removal of vegetation, could be considered a violation of the no disturb zone. The reason this was probably surprising to Linfield is their no disturb zone regs are even more detailed than ours. Footnote 6 of the case. It prohibits grading, landscaping, planting, harvesting, mowing, vegetation clearing, cutting, trimming, filling, depositing any materials, composting, excavating, construction, fencing, etc. So the court is essentially saying, well, all they did was put a bench down. It doesn't fit into any of these categories. And then, similarly, the no build zone, they said, putting in a path doesn't fit with your definition of construction. And again, if you go back to our no build zone, no new foundations, including footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures. Now, consistent with what I've seen, we consider even putting a paver down in that zone to be a structure of some kind. Something that can be reasonably asserted. But is that clear enough in item 4 that that's what we routinely do as a commission? And might we want to phrase this with more clarity to make it clear what we mean? And let me be clear. It says no new foundations, including footings, frost walls, or other in-ground structures. I want to reassure you that courts that have considered the word including have consistently said,
You're muted.
sorry about that. It's not limited to what's listed there, right? Because sometimes a party going to court will say, well, it's not one of these 3 things. And the court will say, no, they use the word including. If it were just those 3 things, it would have been superfluous to put the word including in there. So that's fine. But again, we have to ask ourselves, might we have more clarity? So I looked at Linfield's regs, and they're actually even more detailed than what the court quotes. They title their section, No Disturb and No Build Zones. That's the title in boldface. And then they go into lots of detail. And they go into even more detail than the court quoted for no build zones. They said that fences, swing sets, and similar play structures may be permitted in the no build zone, but not the no disturb zone, with the approval of the commission. But then it says, without limiting the generality of the foregoing, there shall be no buildings, houses, garages, sheds, dumpsters, decks, porches, additions, tennis courts, swimming pools, retaining walls, septic systems, leaching fields, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. And yet, they didn't happen to mention paths. And so the court said, well, that's not really like these other things. There's this legal principle called nocitur associates. It just means known by its associates. And they'll look at the terms in the regulations, and they'll look at the surrounding terms, and then they'll weigh out, well, what does this really cover? What does this reasonably cover? What is a person on notice of? So what I then did was thought, well, where might we find some alternative language? And actually, even in our own regs, there are some ideas. Section 2J of the general provisions, normal maintenance, talks about maintenance that does not result in any net loss of native vegetation or permanently alter the soil surface. So that's a pretty general definition. Then I looked at Town of Reading zoning bylaws. How do they define a structure? I thought this was very interesting. Any combination of parts or materials assembled and joined or mixed together in some definite manner or pattern at a certain location for any purpose or use. Now they say whether or not affixed to the land, but we could say in our context, affixed to the land. Instead of having to do this laundry list, that's a pretty straightforward definition, and yet it covers everything. It would even cover, arguably, putting a bench down, for example. So that's one of the zoning board ideas. And then another one is from the floodplain overlay district, definition of development. So here's another idea. Any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to building or other structures, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, or drilling operations. But any man-made change to da-da-da-da-da. So those are both, not even leaving the Town of Reading. We have some interesting language that we might want to consider as a commission to clarify what we've consistently been doing in section 3D, so that, again, you know, people don't go to court that often. It's when they do that you want to be ready with clear language. You want to show we communicated clearly to the community what the expectations were. People were on notice and we were consistent about it. In Stoneham, I'm just giving you Stoneham because I thought it was very interesting what they did. And again, we're not talking about wholesale changes, but just to let you know, one of our neighboring communities is done. The commission made its discretion allow proposed structure on a wall-type foundation within 100 to 50 feet of the resource area. No mitigation is sufficient to allow a structure on a wall-type foundation less than 50 feet to a resource area. The commission may at its discretion allow a structure on an open pile foundation within 100 to 35 feet of a resource area. And finally, no mitigation is sufficient to allow a structure on an open pile foundation less than 35 feet to a resource area. Again, that's not to suggest we go in that direction, but you can see how that in writing would take care of someone arguing, well, I have this little structure and I want to put it within that 35-foot zone. It won't be on a foundation. It'll just be on open pile foundation. And they say, no mitigation is sufficient to allow a structure in that particular area. That happened to be the approach taken there. So I've talked about the fact that we'll want to in some way get the ZNV and the no structure zone or no disturb zone, however we name it, into our tree removal bylaw. And as part of this process, I want to suggest that those of you with, you know, some of you pretty extensive experience at this point, doing this for many, many months, many cases, I would encourage you to go through the local regs and see if there are certain things that you feel based on experience might benefit from some clarity. Now I find something that's minor, but it's still something I think we could fix easily. As an example, in there's an item N called stormwater runoff. Right after it is an item O called discharge of runoff into resource areas. This is on page 14, and it says all discharges must be appropriately treated to mitigate for turbidity, sedimentation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There shall be no unmitigated point source discharges directly into any resource areas. Well, because I know the stormwater handbook and so forth, I think O is also about stormwater, but it doesn't say that. And it really should, because otherwise it could apply to any point source anywhere in town. So that's an example of a little fix. It would be easy, but it could be very valuable down the line. And this last one, and here's where I'll finish for now before opening it up for comments. And maybe this is a question for you, Chuck, as administrator, if you happen to know. If you look at item G, riverfront area, it talks about the Wetlands Protection Act regs, and it talks about perennial streams. Well, that's all very straightforward. Here's where I'm puzzled. You go to section 12 definitions, and Reading defines a river as a natural course of water that has a continuous or intermittent flow. Now, as you know, in the Wetlands Protection Act, it has to be perennial as defined. And G, riverfront area, seems to define it as perennial. And yet the definitions, it says it can be continuous or intermittent. And I couldn't square the two. I wondered if you happen to know, Chuck, why that was, but I'll end there and let others weigh in.
So I wasn't, I only just arrived as they were talking about updating the regulations. That was approved during my time here, but a lot of the work had been done and they didn't touch every part of the regulations. I would look at that section as Reading considers all intermittent streams and perennial streams with the same authority as they do rivers, which is all the same thing. So I'm thinking that's what they were trying to get around. So there's no distinction between the two in Reading under the local regulations.
And that makes sense to me. I figured that was what was going on, but I think we'd want to revisit G, riverfront area. Again, this is not because it's a problem that's in front of us, but we really want to say perennial or intermittent rather than just perennial like it has there, just to be consistent with the other provision.
I would, that's a section that should have some discussion. I do not believe any commission since I've been here has used that section. We've treated them separately. Intermittent stream, 100-foot buffer zone, perennial stream, 200-foot riverfront area. That's how it's been.
I see. Gotcha. Okay.
So,
I don't want
maybe a change
the point
to define that would be needed.
Right. The point of this is not to create problems, but rather to clarify. Yeah. So if it's going to create problems, I personally wouldn't want to touch it.
Yeah, we have two things happening: what's written and what we've been doing.
Gotcha.
So I think that would be a major change in Reading also.
Yeah, and I don't think we want, at least I didn't propose this in the spirit of that. I was really thinking more about, as someone who was new to the commission, I kept hearing no disturb and so forth. And I thought, maybe we should label that. And then of course, finding out that Linfield did, I thought, oh, well, that's a neighboring town. And so might be a good idea.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll let the commission discuss this, but I do have some questions myself.
Is this something we want to spend more time and discuss tonight, or do we want to give people a chance to think about it and come back another day?
So it's fresh in our minds. It might be nice to field a few questions, but anything in depth, we could come back. How's that? Or let me ask my questions. That's really what I'm saying.
Sure, ask your questions.
So the 25 zone of natural vegetation, we seldom allow any work in that area. And I don't know if it's possible to have an outcome that would allow that area to be protected. And if we had to allow work in that area, or we were so inclined to do so, that the threshold could be so high that it would be hard to become like, it would be hard to copy through for others. So in the past, we've had these projects that were on the 25-foot line. I don't think any were in it, but let's say they were just over it. And we added so much extensive mitigation, almost to a point where they couldn't use that 25-foot area anymore. They bring it back to natural vegetation with trees, and there were so many they couldn't use the area as a play area anymore. So for their project, they were able to mitigate the entire 25-foot area that was lawn. That's a big hurdle. Most people wouldn't want to give that up, but these people did to get their pool. So that's just an example, and that was my thought behind that. And the other thing is, we use the section where it says that the commission can extend the 35-foot buffer based on site conditions. That's an area that we protect vernal pools with, up to 100 feet. So I'd want to make sure that that stays in place. So we have 100-foot, we have open permits right now that protect vernal pools for 100 feet. No build, no, actually the ones we have are no build, no enter, areas, stay away. But they just happen to be mostly wetland, so that wasn't really needed to be discussed, except for a small corner. So those
So-
are my two thoughts
So
based on
actually,
what's out
along
there.
Along those lines, Chuck, it would seem to me that that's an area for clarity is around vernal pools. I think back to Lot A, Main Street, and we had to bring in the expert to get his opinion on the vernal pools, the habitat around it. That's an area that I think we should beef up, along with touching kind of around the edges. And I apologize, Tony, for jumping in on you.
Oh, I was just going to ask if I could get a copy of the case law that you're reading. I didn't see it posted anywhere.
So it was in the distribution, just the email. It was a link and it was attached. And that went out on Friday? Last Friday.
If you
Yeah, I will
can't
look
find
again.
it, Tony, I can probably forward it to you. I do know I got it.
I don't know if I
It's-
got the
it's-
distribution. It may have got sent to spam. So I will
It
look
says
again.
meeting notes and agenda, something like that. Yeah, and we can get that to you if you don't have it.
I would just like to say, I think it does make sense. Bill was saying that the regulations say, extra 10 foot beyond the zone of natural vegetation. And he's suggesting we actually call that a 35-foot no structure zone. And we've certainly treated it that way. So it would make sense to add that language into the regulations. So if we could do a markup version and insert that clarifying 35 foot, I think that makes a lot of sense. And other things that he mentioned probably as well, but that's the one that stands out to me.
We lose Martha?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Are you there? Okay,
Yeah, I'm here.
all
So
right.
I agree with what, I think that seems like, I'd have to read the local regs again, but it seems like a simple addition of just clear or adding that in quotes, the 35 no build zone. It's certainly something we use in meetings all the time. So that seems like a nice one. I like your definition of structure. I don't have to read it again, obviously, but if you could send that around and where that would fall in our regs. But that, I think that would be a helpful clarification. And then like Brian noted, we've had vernal pool questions before, and it would be helpful to just clearly state, and that where Chuck was saying we include that and be, we have discretion to go further, just to say. That one's going to take more thought, I think, to write out. I do know from the MAC conference that there are other towns that have clear language about their vernal pools. So we should look at what other towns do, but yeah, that one might be more than just a minor change. So leave it as it is for now, and then something to take on a future time. But I don't know if the structure definition would be a minor change either, but it would be nice to have a real definite. I know Chuck always says we look at the dictionary.
Well, I say that because we don't have a definition.
Yeah, I know we ran into that issue with a project that didn't realize that a driveway counted as a structure. So I think, we should definitely clarify patios, driveways, etc. would also count as structures, not just houses.
Fences should be clear in there.
Yeah.
too.
I would say that that's an area where you want to think about this example where close up to I couldn't figure out if it was a pond, it's like a spring, is it a pond and a spring? I don't know. But they had put a bench there. And the other thing I couldn't figure out, was it on existing lawn or if it was in some sort of, rough area and, natural area. But I could understand why they would want to do it. It's open to the public. People would want to see the source of the spring. And it seems like it would be a pretty interesting spot. If we don't define structures as everything, and especially like a driveway, those can become very close because our current regulations here in town allow pavement right up to the property line. So in a sense, you could pave your entire lot if you wanted to here in Reading. Just call it a driveway and have a curb cut that's less than 22 feet. So I'm concerned about what can happen in this area if we have a definition, and how would it encompass everything that how we've used it in the past, which is to help us keep things out of the 25-foot area.
Okay. Brian, I think, had his hand up first, and then Bill after Brian.
Okay, first of all, I want to say that I wholly support this effort. I think clarity is almost always a good thing, with very few exceptions. So I totally support this. We do have to find the balance between trying to do too much and then roll it all out at once. I'm aware that we have to be posted at $300 for watching our money and everything, but I'd like to see us do a relatively small bite first, go through the process, everybody be aware of what's necessary for them and everything else, and then if we wanted to afterwards, we could take on a larger effort. And that's really all I need to say. I'm on board with this. I think it's great.
Okay, Bill.
Yep. So my idea based on various comments here is I envision doing a sheet that has some language, some markup, no choices made, but consistent with our conversation. There are, in fact, even some neighboring towns that have the vernal pool language, but as Chuck has pointed out, Item section 3D2, under most conditions, a minimum of 25 feet would be considered sufficient to accomplish this purpose, but a wider ZNV may be required. It says, depending on specific site conditions such as grade, soil permeability, or other impact potential. And it seems like other impact potential encompasses vernal pools. So without making a significant change at all, just suggesting, and I could do a red line of it, you add right after or other impact potential, parentheses, such as vernal pools, end parentheses. You don't have to have 100 foot, but you still, again, for clarity, but not really changing what we're doing. And I'm not sure if I was unclear, Chuck, and I apologize if I was not suggesting for either the 25-foot zone or the additional 10-foot zone that we would take away that flexible language that's there, as opposed to just putting a more accessible label. But this sounds consistent with what I envision, which is in time for the next meeting, I would at least send along a document that has some language for discussion, and anything that relates to our current regs, it would be a red line of the section. But also, for example, the interest in that other definition of structure, that can be on the sheet too, but as Brian said, little bite at the apple now. If we want to do something bigger, that's for down the line. But the sheet could still encompass that just as for discussion. Because what we ultimately adopt after a public hearing and what we discuss beforehand can be two very different things. That's it.
Okay, Brian.
Just to clarify, using the word of the evening, going back to the vernal pools for a moment, the crux of the issue there became not just the resource itself, not just the vernal pool, but the habitat around it. And so that's what the conversation really centered on, was with how vague the language is on protecting the habitat of the species that rely on the vernal pool. So if you could just factor that into your thinking, I'm sure that'll be a lively source of conversation.
And that, yeah. So I think with the habitat comment, that means we can protect potential vernal pools and vernal pools that are not viable because someone went out there and they didn't find, caddisfly, and they didn't find any, whatever else, fairy shrimp, the whole list, salamanders, usually dead salamanders, by the way. Those are the ones you see because someone tried to eat them. So anyways, they don't taste very well. So anyways, that's what I would say about the vernal pool potential, vernal pools, habitat, all that. And I think that we've been lucky. I think that we've been fortunate to have the kind of commissions that we've had here in Reading. And this may be our regulations, but it's worked. It's worked because of the personnel that they filled these seats with. And we've really never got into issues with and making a point, drawing a line and saying, I always try to work out with people. The approach I take, and we took in Boxford when I worked there, is we're not here to prevent you from doing anything. We want to help you do this. I don't expect you to understand the regulations. I'm going to tell you what will work, what won't work. You can come to the commission with that in mind and have a discussion. So.
Okay. Brian has his hand up again. I really want to wrap this discussion up.
I do
within the
too.
next 5 minutes.
I just want to say this while I remember it. Going back to the vernal pool, another focus point there was there's language in there now that says something like the protection around a vernal pool doesn't extend beyond protection of the buffer at large, which we essentially overrode. But I think you should take a look at that language and see if we can do something to give us the flexibility we need there. On that note, I promise, Martha, no more tonight.
Okay. Bill, are we all set as far as you're concerned? Okay, so With that note, the next speaker on our agenda is Brian to talk about something he learned about at the MACC Environmental Conference. So we can turn the floor over to Brian for his presentation.
I have to say, I'm all talked out from all my points about the vernal pool, so. No, let me hang on a second, let me bring this up. Share screen. Can you see that?
Now we can, yep.
Okay, so I went to a few of the conferences this time. Strangely enough, I didn't choose any of them for this presentation. This is actually one I took earlier, put together a presentation and never gave it. So I decided to give it now. And just, to try and be a little faster. I think to cover it while it's fresher before I lose it, and then I'll come back with other ones on the courses I took this time, if that's okay. And
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. So this is on. I'm trying to drive this thing. Hang on.
Do you want to go up to view? And that gets you your slide, or go up to slideshow.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Hello. I've lost it off my screen for a moment. Hang on.
It's up at
There's
the
a,
top.
next to the slide at the bottom of the right, there's something that looks like a screen.
No, I do understand that, but so what are you seeing right now?
We're seeing your whole computer with the red bar at the top.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not seeing that. Let me try a new share and see if I can clean it up that way.
So you need to stop
Okay,
sharing
we back?
first. Nothing's, oh yeah, well, your cursor's moving around. Okay, you're not sharing now.
I'm really good at this, aren't I? Okay.
I think it works no matter what. Seems good.
All right, so up at the top, you can go to the word slideshow. You're almost there. To the left 3.
Left.
Move your cursor a little more left and a little more up.
Oh, yeah, there's a bar there. That's why you won't see it. So I have this bar of options. How do I see beyond that? Huh. That's the issue. I'm not seeing it because it's buried in there.
Huh. Because I'm seeing it.
Okay.
There you go.
So I did it with the function button instead. Okay, so at long last, there's a fair number of slides. I'll be quick. If anybody wants more information, I have the original material that they sent along with it. I'm sure you'll all be as fascinated as I was. As you all know, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Having said that, any questions on the first slide? Okay. So the goals of this session was to get better enforcement and to understand what the goals were and how to do it. And so, the goals are the prompt and continued compliance. And the second word there, the continued, is something that we actually have struggled with. We have sent out a lot of things. We have not been as good at following up. Point to self, we need to get better at that. And the second point, the voluntary compliance there is the key issue, because in my time on it, we haven't got around to issuing fines. In the case law that Bill was just talking about, the way they handled the fine situation obviously was incorrect. So I would prefer not to get to fines. I would prefer to get voluntary compliance, which we have for the most part in the places where we've sent letters and had them come to the meeting, or whatever. We've had a lot of people who have done what we asked them to do. So I would say that's still the primary motivation in this going forward. By the way, feel free to jump in with questions as we go along. Don't wait till the end, you'll forget. Okay, so what I did here was try to come up with issues that we have. So the old ignorance one about they said they didn't know, and that's regardless of the fact that they're right on what is obviously wetlands. Tonight's applicant is an example of that, where he just didn't even consider that there were policies that would matter. So that is a big issue we have. We also have repeat offenders. There are people where something comes up and Chuck will know, oh yeah, I've talked to that person. Oh, I know this person. Oh yeah, he does this. And so that's those two things by themselves are a big chunk, big percentage of the things we deal with from the violation perspective. The next one is, are we as a group aware of what we can do? At this point, it is mostly down to an effort where Chuck and I go to the violation area, so that Martha has come along and issue the letters and then follow-up letters if we have to. If it goes further in any particular case, then there will be times where you have to be more involved. At this point, your only involvement is your names are included on the letters. Just so you're aware, if you have a neighbor who's mad at you, that's because your name is on the letter. But for example, if we ever did get to the point of where we had an enforcement and we were going to be issuing a fine or something, the citation can be given by any member of the commission or the administrator or designee, and then has to be brought forth to the whole commission at the next meeting to get the commission to either agree with it or not agree with it. So we haven't got to that point. Maybe we never will, but that may be a place that you need to be more involved. Next one is a question. I don't know. I do wonder if we are too reluctant. The mere fact that it seems like the Reading Commission may not have issued a fine this century makes me wonder if we might be too reluctant. An area where I would like us to consider being more aggressive, for example, is with the tree services. There are many tree services that work in Reading. Chuck has a very good idea as to which ones are more trustworthy than others. We are allowed to hold the tree service themselves liable in addition to the homeowner. And from my perspective, homeowners in general take down trees, significant number of trees, a very few times in the course of their ownership. Probably a few exceptions to that, but in general, they're going to be doing this infrequently, whereas the tree services do it all the time. So they, in my mind, have no excuse to do some of the cutthroat approaches they do. So if we were ever going to go for a fine, I would be suggesting that we do it to include a tree service on the hope that perhaps we're going to get around that it's not just free and clear. And then you get to the point about, are the fines sufficient? I think Chuck was telling the story about one of the tree services who basically, and I'm going to paraphrase, said essentially, oh, a $300 fine, bring it on. I'm making 20 grand on the project. Words to that effect. So what you should know here is that each individual day that a violation exists constitutes a separate violation. So then it becomes quickly $300 a day for however long. I do need to read, well, there's a section I just saw this afternoon. I have to read more closely because there's something about things like yard waste. Each day doesn't constitute a new violation unless they're not adhering to a violation notice, to actual enforcement letter. So I will read more on that, but the bottom line is we do have more clout just because it can be $300 a day. So the way you do this is you get sufficient evidence, as we saw again from the case law that Bill sent around. What they put weight on was things that happened at the time, evidence that was noted, observed at the time. So taking pictures, moving quickly to send a letter and what have you, understanding how far we can and can't go. And Chuck has had to rein that in a couple of times already. And then I actually forget what I meant by the last one, but basically what I was asking in the beginning was, with a fine, where does the money go? Because I didn't want the conflict of interest or the apparent conflict of interest where the more we fine, the more money we have available for our needs. Doesn't work that way. It goes to the town. This is an interesting one. In some situations, we can assert after the fact jurisdiction. And so that's if something is outside a resource area, but it affects it. So the one that I can think of, and I don't know whether that's an issue here in Reading or not. For example, if you are somebody who drills a well and they are drawing enough water and then near enough to wetlands that they affect the wetlands, that is a place where we could claim jurisdiction, even though it's not within any one of our buffers. By the way, if I'm wrong in that, Chuck, feel free to correct me. I'm sure you would. So there are a lot of different violations. So these are ones that I think are more important to us here. So unauthorized activities in the resource with the buffer, violations of the various states we do, orders, condition, enforcement orders. I mentioned the point about each day is considered a separate violation. And the last one can be important, which each day that the fill remains in place or the land is not restored is a separate offense. I don't know how far that can be taken. For example, in the case we had this evening, how long has that yard waste been thrown back there, decomposes, that constitutes fill? How much jurisdiction, how much leeway do we have there if we wanted to? I'm not saying we do. That's something I want to understand better, but this is what they said in this conference.
And Brian, if I can just insert here with that bill violation day by day, that has been upheld in court to the tune of thousands of dollars. It's usually not a resident, it's usually a company that has fill. They've been told to remove it, and a town eventually assesses, well, you're in violation every day this continued. They go to court and say, you can't do that. And the court says, yeah, they did everything right. They certainly can. And it can add up to thousands of dollars. So I just wanted to put that.
I know the thousands of dollars. The part of that I'm not sure of is I know once they're issued an enforcement letter violation, what have you, a ticket, basically, that's absolutely true. As long as it goes on, they're liable. I just don't know how it works going back in time. Just take the case, imagine that we could prove that trees have been cut down, the brush left 10 years ago. Can you go back 10 years? I don't know. I'm sure there's a statute of limitations. I'm not sure how that works. That's a TBD, I guess. So overall approaches, educate the general community. We've talked about that a number of times. I had the idea, which was met with resounding silence, of getting a list of all the abutters for wetlands and giving them some kind of a letter or something, educating them, saying, you know, essentially, you may not be aware, you about wetlands, here's some things you should be aware of. If you're unsure, call Chuck or go online and read the regulations. But at least to take away some of this excuse of, I didn't know, you know, because we have heard that a lot, especially if we're on site visits and we're talking to the actual homeowner and they went, oh, which is hard to imagine, but we hear it all the time. Ally with members of town government. The thought there is if we could somehow get closer to somebody on the select board. I know we have a liaison. I've talked to her a couple of times. When I've talked to her, it's been mostly about trying to take advantage of her background in real estate to see if we could get something included in a real estate package for new homeowners, telling them the same information about lots of wetlands in Reading. 50% of the properties abut either conservation land or wetlands. So you may well be one of those. Here's some things you ought to know. Here's some places you can go look to learn more about it. If all else fails, make a phone call. Call Chuck. He has nothing to do all day. Communicate with other boards, departments, and committees. This is more of a generic one for me. Although, again, Jeb tonight said he's talked to tree warden, he talked to engineering, and there was no cross communication. So there clearly is room for improvement there. And then the next one is self-evident, which is make sure that, back to that magic word of the evening, that the things we write are clear and concise. Let's see. And then the last one is be ready to enforce if we don't get voluntary compliance. And that is a step that we haven't taken yet. We have gone and done a follow-up letter, but we haven't yet gone to the point of something more significant than something more official than that. So prevent violations in the first place, education, what have you. Get on top of serious violations right away and catch the minor ones and act before they become serious. And we do this every site visit. We're looking, you know, to the sides, like in the when we talked about tonight, when Martha looked across the street. And it is amazing how many times we see things that way, which then allows us to write a letter or, you know, talk to the person if they happen to be out. So this slide actually did not update. We're more than 20 violations. I can let you read this yourself. I touched the point of your name is on the letterhead. Only 6 have we actually closed completely, and the rest have not been pushed to closure. So I consider this a good start. Long way to go. And this is a copy of the spreadsheet that I keep with the different letters and the different addresses, what have you. I know it's kind of an eye chart there, so I won't be quizzing you on any information on here. That's the second page of that spreadsheet, and then next steps. So talk with you folks more about what we do about enforcement. Are we doing enough? Should we consider doing more? This idea of an enforcement plan and policy is strongly recommended in the seminar. And basically what it does is it puts down beyond just a regulation, puts down more in English, more layman's terms about what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, what impact they have, just to try and make it something that's an easy link off of the conservation webpage, for example, where a homeowner could go and get the big picture in summarized form, because at least my opinion, when you're looking at our regulations, there's no chronology to them. There's a section on RDAs, a section on NOIs, and the different sections, but they're not really connected to a great extent. There's not a flow. So I think people come in sometimes not even knowing where to start. And so some kind of a guide, if you will. And that's where the idea of a workflow came through. So they could have an easier way to understand how to do it right. So we won't have so many oopses. And that's all she wrote.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And yeah, we have had, you've done a good job sending out those letters to people where we found violations. We do need to follow up with some of them and see whether they have in fact done what we've asked them to do.
Yeah, and we have followed up with some. I've gone to a number of the houses myself, now that I know that I can, and followed up some more, but there's still a fair number, a good number that we just haven't got back to.
Mhm. Tony, you have a question or comment?
Yes. To address a couple of bullet points a few slides ago, both with preventing future incidents as well as communicating with stakeholders. What would be involved in getting a notice included in some of the town mailings, that go out with the with the leaf pickup schedule and the compost dump schedule and whatnot? Just a paragraph that says this is what a wetland is. If you're adjacent to one of them, consider contacting Chuck before you do any work. Something.
So
that's-
we did put one article, I'll call it, in Fidel's town manager's newsletter. Additionally, we've talked to Jane at DPW about trying to get something included into one of their little sheets that goes out with like the compost schedule and things like that. Seems like those are booked long in advance, so haven't made any progress there, though in all fairness, I haven't tried again in a while. But you're right. Any ideas people have for other ways that we can reach out besides looking over the fence to a neighbor, that would be useful.
Bill,
Just want to say or echo the comment. Just so much appreciate the work that goes into this. It's a lot, and I hate to be a drag, but it's part of my job as a lawyer. Ignorance of the law is never defense. I realize you'll hear it a lot. I agree with Chuck. Part of why I like so much being on this commission is everybody has a constructive attitude. How can we move together? How can we educate? But at the end of the day, that excuse just carries no weight. That's been a principle of in the common law for centuries. Ignorance of the law is not a defense in the end.
So I agree with you. I'm aware of that. I've heard that before. But for example, this evening, that retaining wall that was built by the trampoline, what do? We tell them to take it down, and so that's the kind of thing we as a commission really haven't had a satisfactory action for. When there's a violation and it's big enough or expensive enough or what have you, it seems to last just because it would be so hard to reverse it. So I don't think we have a good answer. You can put your legal brain to work there and that would be good. But that is an issue because we've seen a lot of cases where the homeowner did something and we only discovered because now they want to do something else and now they want to do it right. What was that pool? I forget where it was, but the one where he wanted the pool over to the side for his own reasons. He wanted this big play area for his kids. And yet you look at the aerial view, he clearly had been moving the trees back over the years. And now all of a sudden he wants to be Mr. Nice Guy. So I don't think we have any good remedy for that kind of a situation. We've seen cases where lawn has encroached on in the buffer and beyond. What do? You tell them to dig it up and put it back to its natural state? I don't know. We haven't had a good answer for that. So I agree with your point. I'm not sure what to do about it.
Yeah.
And let me just say in response, two things. One, having looked around the surrounding communities, there's only one that says explicitly, as the commission sees fit to protect the resource area, we can require you to replace existing lawn with vegetation. Most towns don't say that explicitly, right? They take a more, work it through approach. I'll tell you in Belmont, the scenario you described, Brian, you find out because someone's asking for something that they did something else that was non-conforming. Well, in Belmont, we required more mitigation rather than enforcement, since we were working with them anyway. And they say, okay, well, you've come up with mitigation for what you proposed, but you also did this other thing. So we're going to expect more from you than just this, as opposed to doing an enforcement order.
I do like that. That is an approach. Again, in tonight's case, you didn't have a whole lot of room there to do mitigation, but yes.
Yeah, and we have had at least one case where the person had put a shed up in their backyard, and when they came to request something, it turned out that the wetland line made the entire shed inside the wetland flagged area, not even the 25-foot zone, but it was sitting in the wetland. And we did make that homeowner take their shed down.
And he didn't know.
Well, I think he did know, but it was put when he,
That's right. It was placed wrong. Yeah.
right.
Right.
But he was going to place it with the back edge of it at the wetland line, not 35 feet away, which is where a structure should have been. So, and he didn't come to us to ask permission. So, but we did make him take his shed out of the wetland.
And actually, and one last point on that before we recognize Walter's hand up. One of the things that we have to be aware of, Chuck has made this very clear, is there have been times in the past, pre-Chuck, when conservation has gotten a really bad reputation, a bad name. We don't want to get back to that point. I am not suggesting we go and find any place we're technically allowed to. And we don't want to become, the stormtroopers.
Oh, you missed your opportunity, man.
What?
I was going to say, no. No, I like the way you're going. Sorry, I
Okay.
thought my mute was on.
All right. Yeah, I was debating a nice way to say that, came up with stormtroopers, but so we can't get back to that. We don't want it that people dislike conservation. We want them to understand us better and what we're trying to do, to realize we're doing good things. And a lot of people are trying to do the right thing. So we have to straddle that line.
Okay.
Walter.
Let's give Walter a chance. And I just want to remind people we're coming up on 10 o'clock here. Walter.
I will be quick. Is the commission aware of the Arlington laws about trees? They have a very strict rule for construction, knocking down trees, and it's thousands of dollars if you make a boo-boo.
I know somebody who's on this call who knows that very well. Chuck, off to you.
Oh, sorry. But the thing I found fascinating was that the tree warden was the enforcer somehow.
Oh, yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah, so the tree warden's only the enforcer if it's outside the conservation's jurisdiction, because I'm the vice chair of the Arlington Conservation Commission. I know that. So anyways, it is a great law and it works a lot, but believe me, they are complaining about trees, even though they have all these rules and regulations, just like we are. So it's still still old trees, old growth trees, or old major historic trees are coming down and can come down in Arlington.
Okay,
So I know it's quick. I just want to let you know, sending paper copies is old school. We have an email blast. We have Fidel's, our town manager's list. We have the recreation club and all the recreation departments list if we needed to send it out there. We have the ability to match or get things to most of the town through emails. Now, will they look at it? They look at it more in their bill. It takes us 6 months to get in the bill cycle, and we could put a piece of paper, but we'll be bumped a lot. And we did talk to Jen Kinsella about that. So we know that we could think about fall right now and put something together and ask her if we could save a spot. That's all I wanted to add.
okay. Let's move on to the, Chuck, do you have any information about the DPW monthly meeting? I believe it was actually held on May 9th. Anything
So
from that?
the only thing I want to say is we talked all about Millet, getting those projects done. We're in a deadline. We're going to close off Millet on Monday, put the DEP signs out. They're going to do soil borings. More than 100 borings are going to be taking place. So Millet, we talked about the needs I have at Matera Garden and the deadline, about getting soil there, getting the raised beds there, talking to Jeff. So it was more of, we didn't talk at all about issues that we saw around town. It was more or less everyone was in the room, and I had to get these commitments. So it wasn't too exciting, and they didn't talk about any new projects that I know of. Yeah, so nothing's coming up. I think it was Jeff wasn't there, Chris Cole wasn't there. It was me, Mike, and Jane Kinsella. So
And Brian and I both missed the memo that it was happening on the 9th. We knew it was canceled on the 2nd, but
Well, actually, I don't have that excuse. I knew it was happening on the 9th. I just plain old forgot about it.
okay,
It was moved from the scheduled week before.
right. Okay, so the Friends and Family Day, I know some people have volunteered to help. If anybody else wants to get on board, we're happy to have you. Let's discuss that more at our next meeting. And let's go on to minutes for approval. I sent out the April 12th minutes. Have everybody had a chance to read them? And can we have a motion on them? Or are there any corrections that need to be made?
This is Bill McCancel. Make a motion to approve the minutes for April 12th, 2023.
This is Brian. I second that.
Bill McCants in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay, we just got Bill's minutes from April 26th, yesterday. Is there anybody who has not had a chance to look them over and would prefer that we wait and vote on them next time? I don't see any objections. Okay, so what about April 26th? I saw there was one typo suggested for correction. Has anybody seen anything else that we need to correct in those minutes?
So given the definite silence, this is Brian. I make a motion that we accept the minutes from April 26th.
This is Andy. I'll second that.
Bill McCants in favor.
John Sullivan in favor.
Andrew Driven in favor.
Brian Bowe in favor.
Martha Moore in favor. Okay, And if we're really quick, we can adjourn before 10 o'clock. Does anybody have anything else that we need to discuss? We missed the deadline. Can we adjourn at 10 o'clock?
This is Brian Bowe. Make a motion. We adjourn at 10 o'clock.
This is
Yeah.
John Sullivan. I'll second.
All right, and all in favor, raise your hands. Okay, thank you very much. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Good night, all.
Right.
Good night.